I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building Estes their Big Red Max. This is part of their Pro Series 2 rockets that make the transition from low power model rockets up to mid power. And so this is meant to fly on E, F, and G class engines, and is actually a bit more robust than your typical model rocket. Although if you follow any of the rocketry social media, you may hear about upgrades that are available for this that are made by different companies. And mainly those involve replacing the balsa fins with plywood and replacing the cardboard centering rings with either hardwood or plywood as well. I am going to build this model as shown in the instructions, with one possible exception, that I may replace the rubber shock cord with Kevlar. So we're going to open this thing up and make sure we have all our parts and then start with the build. First I'll start with the really obvious pieces. So we've got a 3-inch diameter body tube here, and this is pre-slotted for the fins. Alright, and we've got this really big nose cone here, and this is really what makes the kit, I think. So when you, just before you do anything else, you stick this on here, and that's already a really big rocket. And then the other really noticeable thing here is that the motor mount is for 29mm motors. Now we'll take a look at the instruction sheet to find the less obvious parts here. And these are in several different bags, and I recommend that after you make sure that the part's actually there, is keep them in the bags until you actually need them. So in the largest bag here, we have a shock cord mount that's put on some fairly heavy paper here. So it's, yeah, that's actually cardstock. So it's a little bit different than cutting out the one shown here on the instructions. So if you're going to use the traditional shock cord mounting method, I would recommend using the one they include that's made out of cardboard. Alright, this also contains the decal set, and these are self-stick decals. There are 2 sheets of them. Okay, and then we have the fin stock here, and these are a bit unusual. Each sheet here is for one fin, and the fins consist of 3 pieces that will be glued together. And then finally in the large package we have 3 centering rings. These are made out of cardboard. And so really what's in this package is what's found in most of the upgrades. It upgrades from having the glue together balsa fins to a single piece plywood, and then the cardboard centering rings get replaced with plywood. Okay, now that being said, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this kit, building it stock as is. Now you may want to reinforce the balsa here with paper, and I will show you how to do that. But really, once this has been glued together properly and reinforced, this is still going to be a good, strong rocket. And one of the other warnings is if you do get one of the upgrade kits, you may need to change the amount of nose weight that goes into the forward end of the rocket, because the plywood is going to be heavier. And that brings us to the next package here. So in here, we've got even more packaging. All right, so we have the parachute here. And while most Estes kits nowadays come with a pre-assembled parachute, you actually have to put together your own this time. And so to go with that, we've got a package of shroud lines here. All right, we have a screw-on motor mount. I really love these guys. This is made out of heavy plastic, and I've used these on fiberglass rockets as well that have to have larger, more robust engines, and I've never had one of these fail on me. They work really, really well. Okay, large rubber shock cord here. As I mentioned, I am probably going to replace this with Kevlar, but if you want to use the stock shock cord, it goes on just like any other SD shock cord does. Okay, and then we've got 2 packages of plasticine clay here, and these are to weight the nose cone so that our center of gravity is far enough forward to give us a stable flight. Do not skip using these. And then our last little package here has launch lugs. These are 1/4-inch launch lugs. And I will also show a substitute for these. It's possible, instead of using the launch lugs, to use rail guide buttons, and I'll show you how either one of those can be used as we get to that point. Okay, and then finally we have this green ring is a spacer, and that's shown here. Okay, so it looks like everything that we need is in the kit, and I'll clear this away and we will get started. So in the instructions, our first step is to prepare the fins. And so what we'll do first is simply sand the faces here on both sides before we even take them out. And then we're going to cut these out and glue them together. Now it's best to have a really flat surface and then cover that with some wax paper when you do the gluing, because you will get some glue seeping out of the seams and such, and we don't want to glue that to a good surface. I normally have my cutting mat down here, but for the gluing part I'm going to remove this and do it just against the flat table. So the first thing is to get some sandpaper on a block or a sanding tee like I've got here. But you want something flat so you're not rubbing divots in here. You know, for small fins you can just do it with your hand if needed. But with a surface area this big, you're going to tend to put pressure in areas that will sand deeper than others. So having some sort of flat surface for your sandpaper is going to work better. I'm going to use 100 grit to start with and then go to 150 grit. And this is initially just sanding back and forth. Sand with the grain. And we're not looking for a really deep sanding here. We're just knocking down the high points of the surface. And then just turn it over and do the other side. Okay, and then we're going to use the 150 grit here to smooth things out a bit finer. Okay, and then we will cut that out. So just take your hobby knife here and remove the little tabs in between. Okay, so here I've got the material for one fin cut out, and then I'll just do the same thing of sanding and then cutting on the other two off camera, and we'll come back then and start putting them together. Here I have all of the fin pieces cut out and their faces sanded, and now what I'm going to do is stack like pieces together here. And then I've got a piece of fine sandpaper here, and I'm just going to go through and drag the edges of each group just a few times across the sandpaper to remove any remnants of the nubs here where they were still attached to the stock. Okay, and we just change faces like that. And the main idea here is to try and keep them together and even, because all we want to do is just sand them so that they have even faces. We don't want any curvature in them yet or something like that. And then just go on and do the same thing for every stack. Alright, now back in here, this is all going to be part of the root edge and the fin tab. So I'm not going to sand this part here because we want the fine details there and I don't want to take the chance of breaking them. And back in here, I can't just drag that across. Instead, we can just use our sanding tee or a sanding block and just sand that a little bit. Alright, so now I'm going to clear away my cutting mat here and put down some wax paper or something similar so that the glue won't stick to the tail. Now according to the instructions, we're going to lay the pieces out like this. And so I've got that here, and I didn't have any wax paper handy, so I'm using foil, which will be fine, just make sure you don't have any big creases in it. So if I orient this in the same direction, first we want to make sure that the fin tabs here are even, right in here. Okay, and then this piece is going to fit in between them, and it's possible that it's going to stick out. Okay, don't worry about it if it does. We'll sand that off later on. So you can kind of see here. So if I get that all lined up, then that little triangular piece here sticks out just a little bit. Okay, and that's fine. So for these, I'm going to use wood glue. And the main thing here is we don't want to get a big glob of glue on all of this. So I'm going to use an applicator to give me a little more control. And I'm going to start with this edge here. And what we want is just a thin, uniform layer of glue here. We don't want a big, sloppy, flowing layer, because that's going to just squeeze out above and below the fin, and it's also just going to make sanding harder. So I'm going to start here by putting this on and making sure my edges are even. Okay, you might even want to use a ruler to ensure that. Okay, and I'm just going to hold this for a minute or so while that sticks. And again, this is why we don't want to have a lot of glue on here. We want just a thin film that's going to adhere very quickly. So here I've got the last piece, and I've already put the glue on. And I'm going to fit this into here. And just like before, just press everything together. Try and keep those seams as level as I can. And if we have a little bit sticking out there, that's fine. We'll sand that off later. Okay, I'm going to repeat this off camera with the other two fins, and we want to make sure these are completely dry before we do anything else. So about an hour and then we'll come back and do the other treatments of the fins, including papering and rounding of the leading edge. While the fins are drying, we'll start in on the motor mount. And so for this we'll need the tube, the centering rings, and I've already popped those out of their stock cardboard, and then this green spacer. You'll also need the nose, because what this will do is you put the green spacer on the nose here and just push down on it a little bit. And this just helps open up the ring a little bit, making it easier to slide on. Alright. And once you've got that, we're going to take one of the non-slotted rings here, and we're going to slide this over our engine mount tube. You'll probably need to do just a little bit of sanding here on the inside. And that will allow us to fit this over, I hope. There we go. Okay, and then you take the spacer ring and slide that over as well. Okay, just like that. It's going to be snug. And now I'm going to take this and just force it down. Okay, so that now the engine mount is flush with the spacer ring. And once that's done, we'll go ahead and glue a fillet around there, like this. And you want this fillet to be pretty robust. I am using wood glue for this. You could use white glue, although it's not as strong, or you could use epoxy. Okay, now we're going to let this dry for about 10 minutes, and then once my fillet has set up enough that I can move things, we'll take this back ring off, and we'll use it later on to put the forward ring on. So I'm going to put this aside for the moment, and we'll go back to the fins here while this is drying. The glue on my fin has dried here, and now I need to take off this little bit of balsa. And you can do this with sandpaper, and I will sand this afterward. But first I'm just going to do it here with my ruler. And I've got a brand new, very sharp blade here. And I'm just going to score across here several times until I get through the whole thing. You don't want to try and do this all at once. Okay, now that isn't quite even. I got a little bit of an angle, but then I can sand the rest of this. Alright, and so what you want to do here, normally I would put this like on the edge of a table, but to keep it under here, and I'm starting with some 100 grit sandpaper here. You could also put sandpaper on your surface and hold it this way. Just be careful that this is still balsa and it's a big sheet of it, so it's going to tend to flex and could break along the grain lines there. So however you do this, just do it carefully. But just sand this down until all of the edges are even. Okay, now I'm going to take this off camera so I can do this on a table edge. And when I come back, I'll show you what it looks like. Here I have all of the fins sanded so that the edges are now flush with the rest of the fin. Now you may want to look, hold your fin up to the light, and you may find that you have some air gaps here. So like I've got one right at this point in that fin, same thing here. Alright, and same thing here. So it looks like it's kind of a uniform imperfection. And so depending on what you're going to do with your fins, we have a few options. If you just want to use your fins as is with no other treatment, then simply squirt a little bit of glue down into there, wipe that off, and let that dry before you go on with anything else with the fins. I'm going to paper my fins, which will include putting a layer of glue down, and so at that time I'll fill in the cracks there. Okay. If you're going to use any type of sanding sealer on these, then go ahead and glue that first and then apply your sanding sealer. All right, back to the motor mount, we can go ahead and remove the spacer ring here. And we're going to go ahead and add another fillet around here. So once more, we're going to take some wood glue, just run that around here. Now I'll make this fillet a little bit thinner than the forward one because the engine retainer has to fit over this, and I don't want the glue interfering with it. So here I'll just make a very small fillet. Okay, and once again we'll let that dry, and I'm going to go back to the fins. Okay, back to our fins here. This is where I'm going to depart from the instructions a little bit, and I'm going to paper laminate my fins to make them stronger. And this is done using just a regular printer or copier paper in the 20 to 24 pound range. Pretty common stuff. And what we're going to do is glue this across the fin here. Okay. Now I've done this in a couple other of my videos. If you go to Apogee Components website, they also have a video telling you how to do this. And so it's all pretty much the same. So each of my fins is going to require a full sheet of paper, but I need it cut in half. Alright, so here I'm just going to use my ruler and my hobby knife. Like this. Alright, and then I just want to make sure this is going to cover the whole thing. And it does. Okay, now for this, you'll want to use glue with a longer working time than I usually use. So this is what I usually use for my rockets. It's got about a 10-minute clamp time, dries fairly quickly. We need something that's going to have a little bit longer working time so we can squeeze all the air and glue bubbles out. So I would use white glue or a longer working time wood glue like this Titebond 3. So different brands have similar types of glues as well. I'm not advocating one brand over another. And what we're going to do here is put on a very thin film of glue. So I'm just going to kind of squirt some of this around. All right, and we're not going to do the fin tabs, so I'm going to keep my glue away from there as much as I can. All right, and now we just want to make this a really, really thin layer. Okay, just enough to cover all the wood. All right, and this is also where we can fill in any cracks here. And this is why you want the longer working time. Since this fin is so large, it's going to take us longer just to get all the glue spread. And if you do this with a short time wood glue, it may actually start getting too tacky too quickly. Alright, so glue all the way out here to the edge. And in fact, I'm getting a little bit of tackiness there. And you really do have to work pretty quickly here not only in getting the glue out, but once we get the paper on, we want to do both sides of the fins right after each other, so we don't get warpage. Okay, I'm going to need a little more glue there. Alright, you can see I'm picking up a little bit of wood grain there as well. Trying to remove as much of that as you can. Alright, and then once you've got that, try and clean off your hands as much as possible. Okay, and now we're going to put a sheet of paper on top of this, making sure that all the wood is covered. Okay, and now I'm just going to rub this down and get all of the glue pressed evenly everywhere as much as I can. Okay, and we want to avoid these little bumps that you're seeing here. Okay, and then if you need to do kind of a spot treatment here, just get a little bit of glue, stick it where it needs to be, and press that down. Alright, now I'm going to turn the whole thing over. I'm going to remove that excess glue there, that's way too much. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing on this side of the fin. So make sure you don't have anything sticking up. Okay, and once more, we're just going to put this around and then smear it out nice and uniformly. Right, now in this case it looks like I've got a little bit of excess glue. And I can use this dowel here to kind of squeegee off some of that. Because having that much excess glue is going to cause bubbles. Again, you need to do this pretty quickly. Alright. And now we're going to take our other sheet here and do the same thing we did before. So we're just going to smush this down. Get all the air out of it. Okay, and now what I recommend is putting this on a good flat surface. Okay, so here I'm going to remove my cutting board. eventually I am going to move this to another surface, but just to demonstrate this. Now you want to cover this with either a piece of foil or a piece of wax paper. Make sure you get all the grooves and such out. And simply put this underneath some books. Alright, so you got like a full-sized unabridged dictionary, or in my case I've got a couple of science references here. Okay, and let those sit there for many hours. I would say at least 6 hours, to make sure that the glue dries evenly and the fins don't warp. So I'm going to do the same thing here with my other two fins off camera, and then we'll come back to the fins and the motor mount. I've left my fins to dry overnight with the papering, and so we'll pull these out now and take a look. Looks like a little bit of an adhesion problem on this one, although it's only at the tab, so that's okay. Overall, they look pretty smooth. A few bumps and channels there, but they will certainly be stronger than without them. So the next thing we have to do is carve off excuse me, the excess paper here. And here, if you hold it up to a light, you can kind of see it there, you'll be able to cut things out without damaging the fins. So first, just have a nice new blade in your knife here. Now I'm not cutting all the way down to the fin edge here. I'm just cutting off the excess paper. And there's no hurry on this. Just do a little at a time. Be careful with it so you don't end up damaging anything. Alright, and if you have a long straight edge here, like I have in this case, you can just use a ruler and overlap that a bit. Alright, now here where we have it right up against the fin tab, I'm just going to peel the paper back a bit here and fold it backwards. And then cut through. Okay, now for this part we need to be really careful about it. So I am going to line this up along the area where the fin tab meets the fin, and I'm going to cut very, very lightly here. So we just want to cut the paper and not into the fin tab itself. We'll do the same thing here. Okay, again, very light pressure. here it may have become glued there. Just gently lift up. If the paper leaves a little residue there, that's fine. It'll be hidden. Okay, so now what we want to see is this thin bit of paper all the way around. Okay, and if you get a little bit that's poking up like that, go ahead and glue it down again. Okay, now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to run super glue all along the edges here. So I've got just regular viscosity super glue, and I'm just going to come around here and use it to seal the edges between the paper and the wood. Now with the size of these fins, you're going to go through quite a bit. But when this is dry, we'll have a very hard surface and we'll be able to sand off the edges of the paper there. Okay, so you should see some soaking of the paper with the super glue there. That's what we want. Okay, and this will also help attach any loose edges like that one there. It just ran out of super glue in this tube. Okay, but you get the idea. And so I'm going to go find another tube of super glue here, finish this fin, and I'll do the other fins off camera in the same manner. So after I had put on the super glue around the edges of all the fins, I put them back into their wax paper layers and once more stacked a couple of heavy books on top of them. So these should be done. You can just peel these off. And if they're still tacky, go ahead and let them dry now without any of the wax paper on them. Okay, so I'm just going to go through here and check how it looks. This edge looks like it needs some more glue, as does this one. So your edges should look kind of like this, not necessarily with this much glue on them, but you should see at least a little bit of glue soaking into the paper. Okay, now on the fin tab side, that's not necessary. We won't worry about that. Okay, but the other thing you can do is just kind of peel this up. Alright, it may have enough. So what I'm going to do now is, using my hobby knife, I'm going to try and cut as close as I can to get this remaining paper off, and then I'm going to sand these edges. And when I do that, I'm going to round off the leading edge here, square off the tip edge, and then on the trailing edge you can either leave that square or you can round or taper that depending on your personal preferences. Leaving it square gives you the strongest fin. Tapering this while rounding the forward fin gives you the most aerodynamic fin. And it's a trade-off there between strength and aerodynamics. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead here . This is really impregnated with glue at this point. It makes it really stiff, which is really what we want. But I think I'm going to go ahead and try some sanding of this. Okay, so let's slowly bring it down. Let's try 100 grit, see if that gives us a little bit more speed. Alright, so let's slowly bring it down. You don't need to watch me do a whole bunch of sanding on here. So I'm going to continue this off camera. I'll finish sanding this fin and then trim and sand the other two fins as well. After considerable sanding, I have the fins shaped. And now we can come back to the motor mount here. I'm going to bring in the body tube as well. Okay, so for the next ring on the motor mount, this is going to go toward the middle. And here I just want to friction fit it first. All right, and you can use this green ring again if needed to make sure that the centering rings go on straight. It looks like I need to grab the nose here and open it up a little bit again. Lots of very tight rings and tubes here. There we go. Okay, so we can use that to move that middle ring in an even fashion. All right, now we need one of our fins. So if this is the aft end, this middle ring needs to be here. Okay, and so we need to move this back until the fin there is caught between the middle ring and the aft ring. All right, so I'm just going to go all the way around here, make sure it fits. All the way around. Like that. Alright, because when this is inside the body tube, we need to align the rings such that the slots in the rings are lined up with the body tube slots for the fins. The back end, there, the aft ring, should be flush with the fin slot there, and then the whole fin will go in like this. Okay, and we need to make sure that it is properly aligned with that middle ring. There we go. Okay, now note that we've got quite a bit of gap here. Okay, now part of that is probably due to I've got the ring still on there. And so I take the ring off. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and slide the forward ring on here too. Looks like I need to do just a little bit of sanding on it. Okay, and then we can use the ring once more to push that down. Okay, now the instructions show just doing it to that point. And so now if we put this in, and be careful not to let it move here. We want to make sure that everything is fitting as it will when we get this finished. Alright, so there's the back ring. Alright, and the middle ring slot is lined up. Now let's try putting this together again. Okay, so I'm still seeing a gap here. And that usually means we need to do a little bit of sanding on the fin tabs. I'm going to try all of the fins. Alright, that one's fitting a little bit better, but still not as tight as I'd like it. Okay, and the same thing here. So if we pull this out, alright, so the fin tabs should be lining up so that they're right up against the motor mount tube, and then we should only have just a little bit of space there for the body tube itself. And it looks like it's fairly close. Okay. Now it looks like here I'm noticing just a little bit of warpage there on the aft ring, but it's not too bad. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring this back apart and we'll get ready to glue it. Now, if we come back and double check our instructions here, we are using this as a guide. Okay, and the ring is supposed to get glued in place. Once again, we may have to stretch it on the nose cone. There we go. Alright, so let's come back and check this. Okay, so that notch in the fin tab is supposed to accommodate the ring there. Okay, from this point of view, everything's looking good. Okay, you can come down a little bit. Alright, so that actually looks pretty good there. Okay, if we put this back in, turn it like that. Now we put the fin in. Okay, we're getting spacing problem there, and I'm not quite sure why. Now it could be that the little bit of paper we still got on this fin is interfering there. And so what I can do is try sanding this down on both sides. Now we don't want to sand down the tab too much. This is going to be a little bit tricky. All right, but I'm going to try it off camera. We'll come back and see how it fits. Alright, so I've sanded this down a bit, and it's made my paper job look a little bit ragged there. But I think once we get the fillets in place, it won't be very noticeable. So now if I put this fin in, alright, and hold that tightly, we should get a good bond there. And then if there's any remaining open crack there, we'll fill that in with a fillet. Okay. And I'm also just kind of shifting things a little bit here so that my fin, when it goes in, is going to be flush against the aft end there. So when I pull this out again, it means my aft ring is just a little bit into the fin slot. And I suspect that if I now just push on this so the engine mount is flush, alright, that does give me a little bit more visibility there. Okay, and that fits in nicely. Alright, so engine mount comes back out. Okay, and here I'm going to leave that ring where it is. And I'm not going to put any glue on this part, simply because you can put a little bit there. So this has been rounded just to make sure, for the glue. But first I'm going to glue the forward side here, and then if I need to, I'll put a little fillet in the aft side of that middle ring. So let's get the wood glue again. Alright, and here I'm going to put a bead of glue around the forward side of that middle ring. And then I'm going to take an applicator here, work that into the edge, but also spread it back this way so that it underlies the ring when we get this in. Alright, and then I'm simply going to push this forward. And do this in one quick motion there. You can see how it was kind of grabbing. If you want to, you can use white glue at this step. That'll give you a longer working time. Okay, and I'm just going to smooth out the fillet there, and the excess I'm just going to put on the forward part of this ring. All right, but we don't want any on the outer surface of the ring here, at least not yet. Okay, when we go to glue everything together, we'll get glue on that. Alright, and then the forwardmost centering ring simply goes on the end like this. And here I'm just going to give it a bead of glue. Now notice this does not have any type of a thrust ring. When we get up to this size of motors, the thrust ring is usually built into the aft end of the motor. And if it doesn't have one, you need to build one up out of masking tape. Okay, I'm just going to take the excess glue and make a fillet underneath. I'm going to give that just a few minutes to dry, and then we'll install it into the body tube. While my motor mount is drying, I'm going to make marks here for the launch lugs. And according to the instructions, this should be 1/2 inch from one of the fin slots. It's a little unusual, as usually it goes down the middle. So I've gone ahead and measured between 2 fin slots using a flexible tape like this. Found the midpoint, and then I just drew a little mark there. And I've done 2 of those. So one of them is for launch lugs, and then I don't know if I'm going to actually do this yet, but I want to give myself the line in case I do, and that is to install rail guide buttons on this as well, so that it can be launched from either type of a launch platform. Once you've got those, then you can take this to a door frame or use a fin line drawing guide like this one from Estes. You can also use a piece of angled metal, right? But whichever one you choose, go ahead and draw a line all the way down the body tube. Okay, so there's one line there. Got a little off the mark, but it's not a big deal, as long as the line's straight. Okay, and then our second line here. Tube moved on me a little bit. Okay, so I can use this now to put either or both types of guides on it.